Hello, this will, God willing, be the first video of a short series considering some questions about God that I've noticed get asked from time to time. First question is, who made God? Now, I hardly know what to say about this question, but it does come up sometimes and it needs a response. It seems to arise in response to cosmological arguments, so maybe before looking at the question, we should review what arguments like that look like. There's the Kalam cosmological argument. That's a very famous one these days. It says, basically, whatever begins to exist has a cause for its beginning. The universe began to exist, and therefore there is a cause for the beginning of the universe, which is God. Another version of a cosmological argument might go something like this. I exist, but I might not have existed. I needed something to cause me to exist, and that was my parents. But they also might not have existed. They needed something to cause them to exist. And that cause needed something to cause it, and so on. But it can't keep going into infinity. Something needs to kick this whole thing off. There needs to be some cause that began the whole chain of cause and effect, or nothing is explained at all. That's the rough outline of a different cosmological argument. So arguments like this deal with cause and effect, and they argue that God is necessary as a cause of the universe, or cause of certain things we observe in the universe. And the response, who made God then, seems to be a sort of gotcha response to these kinds of arguments. But maybe sometimes it's an honest question in response to them, just asking for further clarification. But either way, it looks like it's based on a serious misunderstanding of arguments like this. These arguments don't say that everything needs a cause. What they say is that the things that do need a cause have one. God does not need a cause. God is the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover, the uncreated creator. Now, you can say that you don't think there is such a thing, or you could say you think there is no such thing as an uncaused cause, an uncreated creator, but if so, it would be better to explain why you think that. But at any rate, there's no point asking who created the uncreated creator, who caused the uncaused cause. It's a little bit like asking, why is 3 a bigger number than 17? Or who put all those right angles in a circle? The first thing is just to understand what Christians and other classical theists are talking about when we talk about God. We're talking about the uncaused cause. One good way of putting this is most things are caused, and everything that's caused needs an explanation. And there's no explanation unless there's something that is not caused. Another good way of putting this is everything needs an explanation. Most things need something else to explain them. But the first cause, or the uncaused cause, is its own explanation. Or maybe need is the wrong word. God doesn't need anything. Maybe we should say everything has an explanation. And things that don't contain within themselves the explanation for themselves need something else to explain them, namely their cause. But God is the unexplained explainer. God is the being who is his own explanation, or who contains his own explanation. The first cause is its own explanation. That's the first thing. Just understand what we're talking about when we talk about God as first cause. But the second thing is to understand why we think this way, why classical theists think this way. In terms of biblical history and ancient literature, the idea of God as the uncreated creator comes originally from the Torah, the Bible, the Old Testament, the 5 books of Moses. The first sentence of the Bible is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if you read Genesis 1, you find God creates by speaking. God has that kind of power. God says, let there be light, and then there was light. God is not creating out of any pre-existing matter like the gods of the creation myths of the polytheistic religions of those cultures by which the ancient Hebrews were surrounded. And God is not himself a being who comes with a past, a beginning, a backstory like the gods of those creation myths tend to. Now, in terms of philosophy or philosophical theology, there are only a few ways we could possibly try to explain cause and effect. There are chains of causality. There's me, my parents, their parents, and so on. We could say that these chains go on infinitely into the unlimited past, but then there's no explanation for anything, because every explanation has to come from somewhere. And it can't come from anywhere if it never begins anywhere. My parents can't explain me unless they are explained. If there's no beginning to the chain of cause and effect, then nothing is explained. Every supposed explanation is based on the link in the chain before it, but ultimately based on nothing at all, so that nothing is actually explained if the chain were to go on into infinity in the past. Let me try another way of saying this. My parents cannot explain me unless they are explained, and they cannot be explained unless their parents are explained, and so on. Nothing in a chain of cause and effect is explained except by an explanation that gets passed on from one link in the chain to the next. But if every link in the chain needs an explanation, then no link in the chain has one. Now, this is the sort of thing that the great philosopher theologian Thomas Aquinas is thinking when he talks about God as the first cause in the beginning of his Summa Theologiae. This analogy isn't perfect, but I think it's not terrible. Let's try it. It's a little bit like changing a bunch of Hong Kong dollars for some US dollars, and changing them for Pakistani rupees, and then changing them for Kenya shillings, and then changing those for Emirati dirham, and then changing those for South African rand, and then changing those for euros, and continuing indefinitely without ever expecting to change any currency at all for any gold, or even using it to buy a Coca-Cola. Now, there are other issues with talking about an infinite set of causes in the past. There are issues, philosophical issues with that, and there's issues with scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning, and so there was not an infinite amount of time for this to happen in any way. There are other things we could talk about, but I've given the Aquinas one, and that's more than enough for now. So the idea of an infinite regress of causes doesn't really work very well. So we could try saying that there is something that is the cause of itself. But this doesn't make any sense either. It can't be caused unless it's not there yet, and it can't cause itself unless it is there so that it can cause itself. So nothing is the cause of itself. And that leaves us with the idea that something is an uncaused cause, a first cause, a cause of other things without itself being caused by other things. Now that's just the beginning. Proving that there is a first cause does not actually prove the existence of God as such, much less prove that an entire religion like Christianity or Islam or Judaism is true. The next step might be to argue that the uncaused cause is a personal God, like my friend Andrew Lope does in one of his books, or arguing for some massive amount of information about what and who the first cause is, like Thomas Aquinas does in the rest of his Summa Theologiae, or telling the story of how this creator God interacted with his creation, like the Torah and the rest of the Bible does. So please don't misunderstand the beginning, but also please don't stop at the beginning when it comes to the idea of God as the first cause, whom no one made and no one needed to make.